America didn't drift conservative by accident. It was taught a style. That style didn't come from policy papers or think tanks. It came from TV and movies that taught us what strength looks like, from microphones that rewarded volume over evidence, from television screens that turned politics into spectacle, and eventually, the algorithms that quietly select for the loudest version of all of it. And one of the quietest inflection points looks like a bar in Texas, a mechanical bull, and a man who mistakes dominance for identity. The cowboy feels ancient, like he's always been America. He hasn't. Historically, the cowboy as a national moral symbol is barely a century old. The real cattle drives were brief, but what endured was the image manufactured by Wild West shows, reinforced by early Hollywood and simplified into a moral shorthand. In early radio dramas like The Lone Ranger, morality was compressed into a clear enemy and justified violence with righteousness. Movie serials and matinee westerns taught audiences to associate authority with masculine certainty and moral clarity, not deliberation. Television completed the process. Shows like Gunsmoke and Bonanza presented the cowboy as a stable and reassuring figure who resolved conflict decisively and rarely doubted himself. By the time John Wayne became a national moral icon in the 60s, the template was complete. Masculinity equaled certainty, violence equaled justice, and complexity was something only weaklings and villains trafficked in. This mattered because it trained generations of Americans to recognize authority as a performance, one that could be delivered through voice, posture, and confidence. Exactly the traits later rewarded by talk radio, cable news, and algorithmic platforms. In the 1970s, that shorthand stopped working. Vietnam and Watergate shattered the idea that confidence and authority meant moral correctness. Classic westerns collapsed at the box office because audiences no longer trusted simple heroes. Films such as Little Big Man and The Wild Bunch questioned whether violence actually produced justice. When cultural symbols fail, they don't die. They wait for conditions that make them useful again. The cowboy didn't disappear. He went dormant. American films had spent a decade asking whether violence actually produced justice, and increasingly answering no. Urban Cowboy didn't argue with that conclusion. It simply changed the subject. By 1980, conservatism doesn't just re-emerge. It changes how it communicates. Instead of leading with policy detail, it leads with emotional clarity. Instead of argument, it offers posture. This is where Ronald Reagan enters the picture, not as a mastermind, but as the decoder. Reagan understood that television rewarded tone more than detail, that voters connected to stories faster than statistics. That certainty felt like leadership even when the details were thin. When Reagan leaned into ranch imagery and plain-spoken confidence, he wasn't invoking history. He was invoking a feeling. The cowboy wasn't back as a worker or a settler. He was back as a moral performer. And right as that performance becomes politically valuable, culture provides a tutorial. In the 1980 film Urban Cowboy, watch what the narrative rewards. The mechanical bull scene isn't just spectacle. It's instruction. Masculinity is public. Pain is a badge of honor. Falling off isn't failure. Refusing to quit is. Strength isn't wisdom. It's endurance under humiliation. In relationships, jealousy and violence are framed not as moral failures, but as emotional proof. Inability to communicate becomes passion. Possessiveness becomes devotion. The audience is taught that emotional volatility signals authenticity. The reconciliation requires no introspection. The main character growth is centered in persistence. His dominance, never interrogated, is only tested. The story resolves not through understanding, but through reaffirmation. So instead of realism, hypermasculinity is edited as something aspirational. And crucially, it's detachable from place. You don't need land or history. You don't even need skill. You just need to perform toughness convincingly enough. In the 1980s and 90s, Talk radio becomes the first media ecosystem to fully monetize this style. Figures like Rush Limbaugh didn't persuade by laying out evidence. They persuaded by sounding sure. Limbaugh mocked uncertainty because mockery signals dominance. He dismissed expertise as elitism because expertise complicates moral clarity and refrained anger as honesty because anger feels spontaneous and therefore real. Radio doesn't reward nuance. It rewards presence. The cowboy's voice, confident, dismissive, and morally absolute, fit the medium perfectly. Not because talk radio radicalized listeners, but because listeners were already trained to hear certainty as strength. They were tuning out corporate media out of frustration, and this bolstered the emotional impact. At the same time, televangelism adapts the same aesthetic into religious authority. Figures like Pat Robertson present morality not as inquiry, but as revelation. God speaks clearly. Doubt is failure. Opposition is evil. This mirrors the cowboy moral frame exactly. Right and wrong are obvious. Strength equals righteousness. Complexity signals corruption. The cowboy's certainty doesn't just become cultural, it becomes sacred. Strength is no longer just masculine, but divinely sanctioned and commanded. Cable news adds visuals. Now the straight-shooting cowboy must be seen. Hosts like Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly didn't need to win arguments, only dominate the conversation. Interruptions replaced reasoning because dominance reads as confidence. The viewers feel empowered with this confidence when complicated facts contradict simplistic worldviews. This is Reagan's symbolic legacy stripped of governance, and what remains is the posture. Social platforms don't invent this aesthetic. They optimize it. Today, algorithms reward the content that provokes reaction. Reactions that come from moral identity and virtue signaling. The cowboy's aggressive, simple, and emotionally charged style travels farther than nuance ever could, subverting the national conversation into culture rather than policy. By the time Donald Trump arrives, polish is unnecessary. Trump doesn't need cowboy imagery. He simply embodies the performance. Aggression substitutes for authority. Ignorance becomes proof of authenticity. Conflict generates loyalty because loyalty is only forged through shared enemies. This isn't an invention. It's an adaptation. The cowboy performance of certainty, dominance, and simplicity fits those systems unusually well. That's influence, not destiny. The cowboy aesthetic teaches that thinking is weakness, doubt is betrayal, and that force is clarity. Democracy requires patience, ambiguity, and the willingness to say, I don't know. It depends on citizens who can tolerate complexity. However, the cowboy, held up as the quintessential example of American rugged individualism, teaches us quite the opposite. This isn't saying urban cowboy caused modern authoritarianism. It is not saying Reagan planned today's media landscape. It is not saying conservatism equals violence or simplicity. What it is saying is that cultural aesthetics shape what kinds of behaviors feel normal. And our media-centric systems reward emotional styles before they reward ideas. To quote George Carlin, you don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. What we are living through is a convergence, not conspiracy. The question becomes, what do you do with this knowledge now?